Harlequin set up a blog tour, and I shouldn't say this on the live stream, so I'll talk about it later.
You can tell us later.
Yeah.
We are live, sorry.
Hi. Now, someone on the blog tour hates my cover, and I was like, oh, I love my cover, but they were like, I don't want anyone to not get this book because the cover is so bad. And I was like, oh, geez. I love this.
Wow.
I love my cover.
Yeah.
It was a very nice review. Otherwise, they were
Yeah.
like, oh, I love this book, and I don't want anyone to be turned off by this terrible cover. And I was like, oh,
No, but you know what?
I like it.
A similar thing happened to me where I posted on Instagram. I took a picture of me with my book, and I was like, but in the picture, I looked like super creepy. I don't know what was happening with my face. And I was like, this looks really creepy. But loads of people obviously thought I was talking about the book cover, and they commented like, yeah, it does, but I don't mind. And I was like, oh God.
So mean.
Covers are subjective. I really like my cover. I picked the model myself, actually. But
I love the cover.
It's a good one. I like the green too. Just kind of makes it pop.
Yeah, the sort of the wash down is just so good. And it covers a multitude of sins in terms of like her roots and her eye color aren't right, but you can't tell because it's all washed out. So
I think she's a great April.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, I'm going to hand it off to Talia. I will be monitoring the chat and sending any questions to you. And I will end the meeting at the end of the hour. So,
okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. We are go. Okay, so it's just you and me now.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Love Sweet Arrow virtual event in which I talk the ear off of the magnificent Penny Ames about her debut novel, For the Love of April French, which is a deeply romantic title, and I feel like the book really lives up to it. My name is Talia Hibbert. I am a romance novelist and a certified fangirl, and I am thrilled to be here today to discuss this cozy, kinky, revolutionary masterpiece. And if you're watching, just so you know, if you think of any questions during this chat, please pop them in the chat box and we will take a look at them towards the end. So For the Love of April French comes out on the 31st of August, which is this Tuesday, I believe.
2 more days.
Very soon, 2 more days. And Penny Ames, the book's author and our guest of honor today, is a trans woman writing contemporary romance about trans women and other people who don't always find themselves in romance novels. She was assigned Hoosier at birth, but now lives in Austin, Texas, with a beautiful accountant and a very small bird with a very loud voice. Hello, Penny, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. One thing about that description that I've been using is it probably doesn't make much sense to people outside of the U.S. or even some people in the U.S. A Hoosier is someone from Indiana. It's not a very sensible nickname, but that is what they call people from Indiana, and that is where I was born. So that's what that part means. I'm great. How are you? I love your introduction of yourself because I'll tell everyone a story here, which is that Talia gave me a beautiful blurb for the cover of my book, and we kept having to update the cover because she kept getting more honors and awards as the year went on. It started out as, Talia Hibbert, romance author. Then it was Talia Hibbert, USA Today award-winning best-selling author. Now it now says New York Times best-selling author Talia Hibbert. So yes, Talia is a romance author. As she mentioned, and I'm very happy to have you here for this. It's an honor.
Oh, thank you so much. Now I'm blushing, but only on my chest. It's very splotchy. I am honestly thrilled to be here because, as you may have noticed with all the tweets that I've been sending you, I love this book so much. And I am super excited to discuss it. So I'm just going to jump in with our discussion questions. First of all, April, the titular heroine, of course, is the mum friend of her group, her community, her crowd at Frankie's, which is the BDSM club where she meets the hero. A lot of her arc in the book, though, is about learning to let other people care for her the way that she cares for them. Did you know in the beginning that this was going to be her character arc, or did that sort of emerge as you wrote the story?
Oh, no, that was totally the story from the beginning. Obviously, there's lots of things about the book that emerge as I went along. But when I sat down to write this story, the seed of the story was, this is the person who takes care of everybody, but is never really the star. Um, and in part that's because she's trans, but it's also in part because that's how she puts herself out there in the world. And she meets the guy who it just takes an immediate interest in her, and she can't believe it, and she doesn't want to accept it, but he makes her believe it. And it's rooted in a very, very small way in a personal experience. I don't want to overblow this and sound like a lunatic, because it was not a big deal, but I was like, well, what if this was like a whole huge event in someone's life instead of a very minor thing? But
Yeah.
I was part of a online kink community where that I had joined, and I think a lot of trans women, after they come out, go through an experience of wanting to have some experiences in their life. They didn't go through that period in their 20s where they got drunk and had hookups with random people and things like that. And I'm just not that person. I'm not going to be the person who at 30, because I missed it at 20, is going to go out and do that. I probably wouldn't have done it at 20, even if I'd come out then. And I'm happily married. And so that wasn't going to happen. But I thought maybe, getting involved in this online kink community could be, a little bubble, a little microcosm where I let myself get a little crazy. And what happened was, within 3 days, they made me a moderator, because I just seem responsible. And there were a lot of young trans women on there whose lives were a mess and needed a lot of advice and help. And I became that person in that small little microcosm. And then eventually, at one point, there was a new person who joined, and I was like, hi, welcome, being the welcome wagon. And he took an immediate interest in me, and I was like, oh my, like, I forgot that's why I'm here. I got so sucked into this caretaking role, and I mean, it wasn't a big deal. It just happened at one time. But the idea of that as a story came to me like a year after that community had imploded and I'd stopped going there. Like a year later, when I sat down to write, I thought, what if that happened to somebody and it was in real life and it was a huge thing in their life? Because that is something that happens, is you get pigeonholed into that role. It doesn't happen to me in real life, because in real life I'm not as nice as April, but the seed that was the seed. And so from the beginning, that was going to be her story.
I love that you talk about like the seed of real life experiences, because I feel like that's such a creative, a storyteller thing to do. You have like the small thing happen. It's not a big deal to you, but your brain's like, but what if? So
right.
I love that.
What if I'd been in that car accident, but instead of it just being a fender bender, it had, thrown me onto the highway, and it changed my life forever.
This is what we have to deal with.
I think one thing to talk about in the April as a mom friend topic is that it is very much self-assigned. Going back to the joke in my intro, we talk about being assigned something at birth. April has assigned herself as the mom friend. There are actually a lot more there are several other moms in this book who are actual moms and who are constantly telling April to get her shit together and go live her life. She had Fatima, who believes that now that she's a mother, she gets to just tell everybody whatever she wants. Her friend Alina, who runs the D&D group and runs a support group that Dennis goes to, she's a mom friend, and she's literally a mom, and she's there, and she's just a background character who takes care of all of them. And she's 50 and happily married and has been out for more time than she was in the closet. And so she's a genuine mom friend. Even Vanessa, the dom that she hooks up with, has her life kind of figured out and within its parameters. And April is trying to be one of those people, but she's still in the middle of her life. She's still starring in her own show, and she has to learn to accept that.
Yeah, I feel like what April has is the kind of unique shyness that you maybe don't see a lot of in, well, I was going to say romance novels, but in any genre novel where there's a heroine who takes charge of the story, because she's not shy as in she can't speak up and do things. She's just shy for herself, but bold for other people.
Yeah.
And because, like you said, she's so nice, it's so easy for her to kind of section herself off into the corner and only, put herself out there for other people and not for herself. So it was just such a satisfying arc.
Yeah, it's I really enjoyed writing her story. In some ways, she's a lot like my wife in that way. My wife is sort of a background support character in a lot of people's lives, but and that's how she wants to be. She wants to help people, but she is, herself a wonderful person who deserves to be the star of the show. So
that was very romantic, by the way. Okay, but moving on, we also meet Dennis, our stern brunch daddy hero with a heart of cinnamon roll gold, who I love, by the way. And his arc is kind of that he'd had a previous relationship end because of communication issues, without giving too much away, which can be a particularly big deal with a BDSM dynamic, right? But it's also just a very common reason for relationships of any kind to fall apart. So what was the intention behind this part of Dennis's backstory?
So this was something that emerged in the writing, and there's a few reasons for it, but one of the big reasons is I don't know how to write a hero who isn't a little bit neurotic and conflicted. So I sat down to write an alpha male, a top, a dom, and the book starts from Dennis's perspective. And almost immediately, Dennis is getting self-conscious about how he's dressed and trying to figure out if he's dressed properly for this Austin club, because it's different from what he's used to. And he's very fastidious about consent. And then especially when I got to the end of that first quarter of the book, where Dennis really wants more, and April says, "Oh, you mean just as friends, right?" And he says, "Hey, however you want it to be." And I was like, okay, if I'm trying to write an alpha male, like dominant type, why does he pull back then? Why does he let her get away with that? Why isn't this a novella? Why is it a novel instead of a novella? Why doesn't he say, "No, I want you," and that's it, book over? And I thought about it, and the reason I wrote him that way and the reason that I came up with in the story are two different things. The reason I wrote him that way is because, I spent a good chunk of my life trying to pretend to be a man. And I was a feminist as well. And I was just incredibly anxious about ever putting pressure on women, about ever making women feel unsafe. All those things terrified me in a way that was probably a little bit of a giveaway. I mean, no, you should care about those things, obviously, but it set me off in a way that, looking back, I recognize as dysphoria about my gender, about being like perceived as a man and therefore a threat. Really upset me because I didn't want to be perceived as a man deep down. And I knew that wasn't the explanation for Dennis, but why did Dennis have those qualities that really were sort of just, he'd contracted from me by osmosis? And I thought about that he's what I think of as a recovering alpha. He was that hard charging person. And I have a soundtrack which is on my website for this. And the first song is the Faster, Stronger, Harder song by Kanye. And that song is meant to represent Dennis before he comes to Austin. That is him at like the height of his ambition and confidence, where he just thought everything was going to go his way forever. And he had this relationship that was kinky and so fulfilling for both of them. And it seemed like they were just communing soul to soul. And, they didn't really stop and talk about it or have any kind of safe words, but we don't need that because we love each other. And then blows up in his face.
Yeah.
And I know people who've had similar experiences and not even necessarily kinky experiences, but experiences of being in a relationship with someone who, I mean, Dennis blames himself fully, and it's his perspective in the book, so you never really see any of that. But I mean, I'll say, as the author, Sonia owns some responsibility for that too. For wanting to be the perfect girlfriend and wanting to present yourself that way all the time and never breaking character until it's too much, and then you just walk out. And I've known guys that's happened to, and it's like, well, like, did you really believe that your girlfriend just loves to cook and clean and wants to do all of it? It's like, well, that's what she told me. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, come on, bud. But at the same time, like, if you tell your boyfriend, "No, I love to do all the cooking, it just makes me so happy, and I don't want you in my kitchen," and then you finally hit your breaking point and you're like, "You know what? I hate fucking cooking for you." in the breakup, like that is going to leave some scars in that dude's head. And that is what happened with Dennis. But it was in this kink setting where it's that much more harmful. And he was just sort of shattered by it. And the situation Dennis finds himself in, where Jason comes to the city and rescues him, that's again something that came out of my own life. My best friend here in Austin, when my first marriage ended and my wife, my ex-wife moved to Korea and stayed there until I brought up the idea of divorce and acted surprised. That's what happened to my first marriage. And so after that happened, I was living by myself in New Rochelle, and it was pretty bad. And my best friend just showed up at the U-Haul one day and was like, "You're going to come move to Austin with me. I'm moving to Austin. I need a roommate. Get in the truck." So
that's
yeah,
so sweet.
And that's what Jason does for Dennis in the story. And so again, that's like a piece of my story, but I had to give him something that blew up his life like that.
Yeah. It's so tragic, isn't it? How you make these characters and you're like, yes, you are special and precious and I love you, but now I have to decimate your life and your self-worth so there can be a story.
Yeah. Yep. Dennis was much happier, I'm sure, before that happened to him, but he wasn't. I mean, he was playing Russian roulette, and I just decided when the bullet came up.
I love that. And he does end up with a very happily ever after. So
yeah. Yep.
So both Dennis and April are people whose identities are simultaneously hypersexualized and stigmatized in our culture. April because she is trans, and Dennis because he is Black. But between them, they manage to enter into this relationship with someone who sees them as a whole human being. How did the social context of their identities inform how you approached the dynamic between them, both the sexual dynamic and just like their emotional connection?
Yeah, that was the really interesting aspect of it, because, and this is the part where I get to throw some light back on you again too, because with April, it was very much intentional, because a lot of my inspirations for this story came from you and also from Rebecca Weatherspoon. Rebecca Weatherspoon, especially for some of her kink stories, like the Fit trilogy and things like that. But Ravenswood cycle for your books, and then also the Brown sisters in more recently. And the thing about those books, and I talked about this in a recent panel as well, is a lot of them have a Black heroine and a white hero. And to me, especially in the BDSM context, it really takes that central idea of romance and sharpens it to a really sharp point, which is loving someone means trusting them. Mm-hmm. And like in a male-female relationship, you've already got, the entire history of the world telling you, don't trust men.
Yeah.
And then when there's that racial difference, it's saying like, okay, you're going to trust a white man? You're going to trust a white man to tie you up? Are you crazy? And yet this guy is worthy of it. This guy is a fantasy because he's worthy of it. You can trust him with that burden. And when I started reading romance, I was really drawn to those books, and those were some of my favorite books. And I had to examine that. I'm like, why are these the books that really speak to me? And I realized it was because I saw an analog in there. I saw the experience of being a trans person in a world where there are people who are in relationships with other trans people, and that can feel safer, because being with a cis person means trusting someone who has that power over you. And I realized I was projecting a lot of my feelings onto those relationships that, that the Brown sister, they're not all with white men, but the two Brown sisters who are with white men, that the feelings that they have about that, or about, the people in the first two Beards in Bondage, or Rafe by Rebecca Weatherspoon, where like this nanny comes along, and like Rafe doesn't have a whole lot of an arc. Rafe comes along and he meets this doctor and is like, God damn, you're amazing. I want to raise your kids and cook your meals and take care of you forever. Let me. And she's like, no, I will not. And the whole book is him trying to persuade her. And other than that, he doesn't have a lot of an arc. And that was the story kind of that I started to set out to write for April. But then I made a choice that I wouldn't have made if I was doing it now, but I wasn't as plugged into the romance community. I wasn't as thoughtful about these things, and I made Dennis Black, and it was a very simple decision. In that I was thinking of T'Challa from Black Panther, I have this theory that when you watch Black Panther, there are the three male heroes in there that sort of represent the spectrum of masculinity.
I see that.
Yeah, T'Challa he's cold and he's under control and he's principled, but he's got that passion burning under the system. And so what you want, and this is Dennis, is to crack that and see that passion come out. And April thinks that from the minute she meets him. I want to see that heat. I want to see that heat in his eyes that's never there. And the problem with the T'Challa is that he will break up with you for the greater good. And then you have the Killmonger, and Killmonger it's all on the surface. It's fire and it's passion and it's heat and it's sexy. And the problem with the Killmonger is he will shoot you in the head if he has to.
Yeah, that's a pretty big problem compared to the other two.
And so after we saw Black Panther, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, and we were arguing over the two of them. And we asked my wife to be the tiebreaker. My wife was like, M'Baku, he doesn't have any of those problems, and he's got huge thighs. And I was like, yeah. The biggest problem with M'Baku is he will break your bed and get you pregnant. So I knew when I sat down to write this book that Dennis was T'Challa. He was a T'Challa type, so I made him black. It just, that was how I was picturing it in my mind. But then later, as the book became a book and it had it became longer, and Dennis had to have an arc, I started to think about the issues with having a black man in that same role. Like, Dennis is cis and April is trans. And so that was the dynamic I was thinking about. But April is white and Dennis is black. So I couldn't keep it on that same, like, I'm just here to fix your life plane. I had to think about that topic. And so I had to really dig into tackling that. And, the discussion that they have about clothes. He wants to buy April clothes, and they talk about money and what it means to him and how he relates to that, that spending money and what it means to him to have her spend his money, and the sort of umbrella that he's trying to extend to her. That was a place where I was like, I got to get this right, because if I get this right, the rest of the book makes sense, and if not, it's just going to look racist and stupid. And, there's a lot of talk these days about, not writing outside of your perspective. And if I'd seen all those conversations, I might not have done that. But at the time I hadn't, and I wrote this book, and I came to the point where I was like, I can't change him. Like, this is who Dennis is. This is the character I've created. I can either work really hard and try to do a good job and, take my lumps if I do a bad job, or I can scrap the whole book. There's not a middle path where I go back and rewrite Dennis to be white. So that's what I did. And I got some great help from Salt and Sage editing, the sensitivity editors. I got some great feedback from some friends in real life who are people of color. And I got some great feedback from my editor, John Jacobson, who cares a lot about that topic as well. And so we really worked on that. And I think I'm very satisfied, and I hope other people are very happy with where Dennis's arc wound up, which was pointing back to the community piece. April has that community, and she needs to sort of step out and be the star. Dennis is used to being the star, but he's got to learn to have a community that he can turn to when things go wrong, because he's been doing things by himself. And so he has that sort of parallel but opposite arc, rather than just like waiting in the wings for April to get her shit together, which kind of makes him this sort of passive rescuer that I didn't want him to be. That was a lot. But this is one of the things that has been, the most on my mind with this book. And I've been, so happy with the reviews that I got, many of them from Black women who write romance that have really resonated with this book. And it's been like, okay, like those are some viewpoints that I'm really happy to get, that I didn't fuck it up. It was a big risk. And like I said, if I'd had been more a part of those discussions, I probably wouldn't have done it. But it was definitely something I thought a lot about.
Well, one thing I love about where the book ended up, without giving too many spoilers, it really clearly reflects what you said about what you wanted their arcs to be, because April's big thing is that she has to realize that her problem is trust, and she has to explicitly place the trust in him that she's maybe been implicitly giving and taking back throughout the book. And his big thing is that he has to you know, obviously they do have like a dark moment and the relationship is in peril because this is a romance and that happens more often than not. And his big thing is that even though he still really cares for her and he misses her, he has to be able to have this time to have his feelings and to be with his various friends and to be taken care of until she can, you know, sort things out and love him. So I really enjoyed that.
That's good. Yeah.
And, you know, talking about community, it's super important for both of them in the book. What inspired, particularly, you know, in terms of April's role as a community leader and builder, and also the various different friends and friendship groups that they had? What inspired that, and what does community mean to you as, you know, an author, a writer, a debut author?
Yeah, I would say what sort of inspired that is I love that about romance novels. And this again, in the last Brown Sisters book, where you see the whole family and you see their parents and you look at them and you're like, oh, I'd love to see their novel. And, you know, almost every character in a romance novel, you look at them and you're like, you got a book in you, you got a book in you, you got a book in you. It's a really rich, generous genre in that way. In some books, you have background characters who are clearly just there to like deliver their line and disappear forever. But in romance, everyone's getting an audition for the next book. Everyone's moment is an audition for the next book. And I love that. And so I just like I put in so many characters for that exact reason. Not that I would necessarily or could ever write all of them, but just because even if I never do, I want you to be out there thinking about, you know, this Dom and her wife and her succession of like thirds that she brings in, but her wife is never going to. Someday someone is going to crack that and find they're going to find their perfect triad. And like that book is going to, will I ever write that book? I don't know, but you can imagine that book when you meet those people. And you know, that's what I'm trying to do when I sort of populate that community with those people, and is to create that sort of rich gallery of possibles. We're talking about the publishing community. It's been great. You know, I spoke about, you know, most of my favorite books are written by Black women, and Black women in publishing have been super welcoming and kind to me. And the trans wing of publishing has been super welcoming and kind to me as well. Mae Peterson, who wrote The Calyx Charm as well as the other Sacred Dark books, you know, has done that. You know, the whole like trans girl summer thing I've been pushing this summer of all. Well, it's crazy because when you look at it, the number of books with trans heroines has doubled this summer. Just, you know, there were 6 and now there are 12, and half of them were written by trans women, which was not the case before. It's wonderful and it's great, and like the community and all, you know, of all of us getting together and supporting each other. You know, I have a panel with May tomorrow, and super looking forward to that, because I don't know, when I found out that just before my book came out, May was going to release her first book with a trans heroine after writing several books that had cis characters, I was so happy for her. And, you know, because she beat me to it, like she's going to have the first one from Karina. And like, I was not like, oh, well, she took my thing. It was like, oh my gosh, there are 2 of us. And then it's like, oh my gosh, there are 6 of us. And so, you know, I just kept wanting to throw that spotlight bigger and bigger because it's so good. Like, honestly, you know, I wrote the book because, you know, the whole Toni Morrison, you know, if you can't find the book, you have to write the book. You know, that's I say it like that just because, you know, people quote it all the time, and it's like I feel like everyone knows what I'm talking about, but like I did. That's what happened. But you know, now suddenly the other books are out there, and it's great, and it's a relief because, you know, April is a particular kind of trans woman. She's not every trans woman, and there are many different types. And you know, the fact that I've got a book out, and Lily Seabrook has a book out, and May has a book out, and Jessie Noel has a book. Like, you can read a bunch of different types of trans women, and you can read about trans goddesses if you want to go look at the Gods of Hunger series, and you can read a trans historian with a trans man and 2 trans women triad. If you want to go look at E. Ottoman's The Companion, and you have all these options now. And it's a relief to feel like if someone is like, well, I don't identify with April. She's like so femme and so obsessed with like passing and like I'm not like that. I'm a butch trans woman. It's like, great. There are books for you now. There weren't, but now there are. Like, don't read my book. Go read somebody else's book. And being able to say that is in itself a privilege. So I don't know. I've learned so much from the publishing community online and the romance especially. Yeah, it's just it's hard to even give out all the flowers that you should, because there's just so many people who are doing such great work and are such great like community leaders. Somebody who I hadn't read as much of her books before I started writing, but he's just a great voice in the community that I love to hear. Katrina Jackson. Courtney Milan, of course, is a loud voice in the community, and she's always got something smart to say. And she wrote one of the 6 books with a trans heroine back before it was cool. And love being in a community with her. When I shouted out you and Rebecca Witherspoon, and I was like, they don't even know who I am, and you're like, of course I know who you are. And offering me an arc and giving me a blurb, like all those things, like it's really been embracing. And obviously there's a lot of work to do in publishing and in romance especially, but the support and embracing of these trans heroines and trans stories and trans authors has really been moving, because I didn't know what I would get. I didn't know if it was going to be a completely uphill battle, and I mean, it's not easy out there, but having a large chunk of people who will say, hey, I'm gonna use my platform to magnify this and get the word out there, because I think we need more trans books. I think this is great. Is wonderful.
That's so lovely to hear. Oh, I feel like romance is a really special community. It's an interesting community too, because there are all these sections of it that are a bit more stressful and not as amazing, but then at the same time I feel like you can always find your people who are just going to be lovely and fabulous, and I love that for us. And honestly, you've brought up so many amazing authors who I love, and also a few who I need to check out, so now feels like a good time to ask, what are your top 3 to 5 books that you would recommend, like right now?
Oh, 3 to 5. Oh, it's so hard. I'm a huge fan of the Calyx Charm that Mae Peterson, her latest book. The whole Sacred Dark series is wonderfully realized and beautiful. She's such a expressive writer, and it's such a cool fantasy world. It's a fully realized fantasy world. It's not PNR or urban fantasy, but it's not orcs and castles either. It's very kind of Mediterranean and sunny is how I think of it. So I love that. And then the whole mythology of queer people that she's created in that book is just amazing. I can't wait to talk about it with her in our panel tomorrow. The Gods of Hunger series by R.M. Virtues, as I mentioned, Black Trans Mask, dude writing just amazing mythological retellings with just tons of trans goddesses everywhere, and everyone is a lot of ethnic diversity as well. And so I remember I read Drag Me Up. I couldn't remember the pronoun. Drag Me Up, reading Drag Me Up and thinking like, oh wow, this is like, it felt very much like a mirror of April and Dennis. I was like, oh wow, yeah, because Hades is that sort of like intense dominant personality, but just keeps himself on a tight chain, and Persephone is that sort of fragile, vulnerable person who wants to keep her distance, and then they're just passion sort of throws them together. And I just like, this is it. Like, I mean, honestly, if this book existed, I might not have written I might have written something else, because like, this is the book I wanted. Those are great. Like, if I'm gonna pick one Rebecca Weatherspoon, I did this for one thing, an article I wrote. At Her Feet is near the top of my list. It's a lesbian sort of mommy dom book that is great, wonderful, and gets a little intense towards the end, but there's some moments where things get tense, but it's a great story. Rebecca's got so many great books. Haven, the final Beards and Bondage book with three Black protagonists and a triad is also wonderful. What's my favorite of your books? That's so hard.
Oh
God. I'll cheat a little bit and say the entire Ravenswood cycle is very near and dear to my heart. Yeah, I know it's older, and some of the themes I think are mirrored in the Brown sisters books, but I love those books. I love the imagery of the heroine just smashing the car to bits with the baseball bat and all of that. Just some really sharp edges on those heroines, and some men who just absolutely do not give a shit and want to love them and make them happy. I love that. Is that four? Is that 4 or 5? That's 4, right?
4.
What have I read recently that really, something a little bit off the beaten path, maybe? The Ladies Guide to Celestial Mechanics is one that I'll throw out there. I really enjoyed that one. I thought, the historical aspect, which none of the other books I've mentioned are historical, so I want to bring that up. That it's FF, and it really deals with what I was talking about creating that rich world where everyone has a story. The fact that even background characters, it kind of has that sort of classical Shakespearean comedy aspect where even the background characters are falling in love and getting married, and I think there's like 4 different couples that end together by the end of that book, and it's there's obviously there is a main couple, but it's just it's that kind of again, Shakespearean comedy of like, book's over, everybody's getting married, like pair up. And I mean, it does it well. I say that in a sort of a frivolous way, but it executes it very well. But it's just like everybody's getting their happy ending. No one leaves without one. And I love that about that book. So I'll throw that one out there to get another one in the mix, and a historical in the mix.
Nice. That's a really great range. We've got like high fantasy, I would say, for me. We've got contemporary, we've got historical, and then we've got like the Drag Me Up is interesting because I feel like it's a really, obviously it's based on Greek mythology.
Yeah.
But it's like a modern city, but it's it's a very
I love
cool
that about
world.
it.
Yeah.
I love that about that because it's the technology is there, but it's not obtrusive, and it feels like it takes place in like another world. It feels a little bit like American Gods, like somewhere where the gods, just like a little over to the left where the gods hang out, all this is going on and history is playing itself out according to the inevitable patterns, but now with cell phones. I love that about those books.
That was a fab recommendation list, and very impressive to me because whenever anyone asks about my favorite books, I forget that I have ever read anything. So
well, I've been doing a lot of panels and blog posts and things like that, so luckily I have a lot of things locked and loaded at this point, but it's hard to keep track of all the stuff that's out there. And definitely it's hard to make those choices. Like I said, the other trans film authors out there, Lily Seabrook and Jessie Noel, I want to make sure to mention them, but I've done that. So
I think you're doing a great job getting everyone has a book and we all want to know about them. That's the great thing about romance as well. You never run out of books to read or people who want to read books. But talking more about community, I feel like another character in the book who's not actually a character is Frankie's, the club, right, where Dennis and April meet. And it kind of functions as like a literal safe space, or like a found home for the characters. How did that, you've already touched on how this whole thing blossomed from your online experience, but how did crafting that go for you when you're writing the book?
Frankie's definitely like grew from several of the things that we've talked about, starting with that community, that online community, which I mean was full of drama and kind of imploded in the end, but this was sort of more of an idealized version of it. And by filling it, as I talked about, with these background characters who really have their own stories, is how it like starts to come to life. One thing that I really had to do when I was in edits was go back and give it like a physical concept, because it like I had a mental picture, but I didn't talk about it at all. And John came back and was like, what does this place look like? Like, what's going on? Physically, it's based on the old 1-to-1 club venue here in Austin on 5th and Brazos. And it's a mustache themed hipster bar now, which hurts my soul. But when it was a music venue, it had a nice little downstairs bar that was incredibly loud because it was only like about the size of the living room, and there's a stage at one end. But then it had a really nice rooftop bar, and exactly as it's described in the book, Austin had kind of grown around it, and so the rooftop had become kind of sheltered, and you could look out. And there's a song by Amy Cook it's actually about New York, but she talks about the hotel lights and looking at the hotel lights like they're the stars. And it's kind of like an old romantic song about, like no matter what happens, we'll always have the stars. But because it's set in this big urban, we looked on the stars together, and, I'll always look up at the stars and remember you. But instead, because it's set in this urban setting, it's the lights at the hotels. And I've had several extremely romantic experiences at the 1-to-1 club. It's where I met my wife. I went there on some dates with other people as well, and it was just that rooftop, those couches under the little gas heaters and looking out at the hotel lights are very poignant memories of mine. And so I put a lot of that into the book. In terms of larger backstory, this is something that's sort of eventually revealed in the book, and without getting into spoilers, there is a real Frankie who doesn't appear in the book but is eventually discussed. And he ran a gay kink club back in Illinois, and is sort of the beginning of that idea of community, of somebody who builds a community that is bigger than the ostensible purpose of the group, but of the space. Is it really just becomes like a place where people can go and be safe and taken care of, and that's sort of the dream of Frankie's that April is eventually sort of trusted to carry on. I want to get that into that'll go into Jason's book if and when I write that one. That'll be a part of Jason's book.
Jason's book?
Yeah, Jason will have a book possibly one of these days. Jason, for people who have not read the book, which is probably quite a lot of the people. Yeah, Jason is Dennis's best friend who does rescue him, and he is a gay submissive who dresses like he's 14 years old. He's like hoodies and jeans for life, and lives on cereal and Hot Pockets, and is a coder, but has a secret life as the ultimate bottom. And so he's a lovable character in his way. Do you mind if I go on a tangent? I do these things. I go on tangents. I do these things. I go on tangents. But so one of the ideas, like I told you, the core idea of the book, but I had several other like sub ideas that I had not really been able to develop, that I was like, oh, I'm just going to steal that. And I'm going to weave it in here to fill in backstory and things. One idea I had was a modern day Pride and Prejudice with a group of trans friends who are a D&D group together, which is April's group of friends, Pride and Progesterone. And instead of the mom, you have the DM, and then you have the 4 trans women who are all very different from each other, like the Bennett sisters. And April and Dennis are kind of the oldest sister and Bingley. Jane and Bingley. They are Jane. They're my Jane and Bingley. And Jason would be the Darcy, but his Lizzie is not in this book. But he's like that. And so he is initially perceived by April as an unfriendly presence, but he's not really a bad guy. He's just Darcy-ish. So that is some sort of the, building a large crowd of characters is difficult. And so that was something I reached out and I was like, okay, so that's her group and that's his group, we'll draw on this sort of retelling that I wanted to do. The other idea that ended up getting woven in there that I had was a reversal on the workplace romance trope of like the CEO who makes an indecent proposal to his secretary.
I love this.
It was like, what if you had like a young, wealthy CEO who's very naive and inexperienced, and a secretary who's not, older, who's, been around, and she's like, I had a certain arrangement with the last CEO, and I thought, and like, what if you reverse that dynamic? And like, there wasn't a whole book there, but there is a little bit of that in April and Dennis's experiences. And April is a more experienced sub, and even though Dennis is in the lead, she's just like, she's a little more professional about it. She's a little more like comfortable with that world. That's really all that survived in that aspect of it. But
I really love as well the workplace kind of element to their connection. But again, it's something that I don't want to talk too much about because spoilers, but I love that. And I love that you said that Jason is the Darcy, because it's so perfect. Like, my favorite scene with him was when he's trying to do something nice for April and she's like, what is happening? What are you trying to do here? He's like, I'm being nice. It was great.
Yeah.
It looks like we have a lot of questions in the chat, so let me just have a look. Okay,
I know we're running out of time, so.
Asha asked, we've been chatting so much, we really need to. Asha asked, which scene in the book was your favorite?
I think the scene where they go and get barbecue is one of my favorites. They're that or negotiating the clothing aspect of it, but I think the barbecue one I really like. It's not a very, like, it's very PG rated, I guess. Like, you could in a movie, you could show it in like a PG-13 movie, but it's very charged and it's very intense for April. It's very intense in terms of the fantasy of sort of being dressed up and of wearing clothes that really push her boundaries, and of taking him to a place that's important to her and personal to her, dressed like that. And, just how comfortable she becomes over the course of the meal and how they connect with each other, and how it's bigger than the sex. That is sort of underlying it. Like, they both like lose track of the fact that this is foreplay, and it just becomes like hanging out in a picnic table eating delicious barbecue. I think that's one of my favorites. And I talked earlier about the scene where they sort of negotiate the clothing thing, and I think that's also one of the better ones, I hope. So
I love that. Actually reminds me, I loved when she's kind of clowning him about barbecue because he's from
Illinois. He's from Illinois, yeah.
And she's like, oh, you don't really know about barbecue. And then at one point he calls her Professor Barbecue, and I thought that was so cute. Another question, which scene was the most difficult to write?
That's definitely the negotiation on the clothes thing, because there's so many things going on there, and some of them are, outside of my territory, outside of the space that I have to write about. But if you're going to write about a Black millionaire who like gets off on throwing around his wealth, like, you got to talk about it. There are places in Austin that are like, the east side of Austin is where all the really fancy bars are. Hold on. West side. The west side of Austin is where all the really fancy bars are. And every year, every once in a while, you hear a story about, some, white collar worker went to go in there, and they were like, hey, you look a little dodgy. And it's like, he's just like a white collar guy, but he's in jeans and a hoodie and he's Black. So they're like, no, we don't want you in here. And so, bringing that in there, like evoking that was like, oof, touching the third rail a little bit, but you got to talk about it. If you aren't going to talk about it, you're not being honest about why this is an important thing to Dennis. So that was super hard. That was super hard to write. I think one of the other harder scenes to write, what's the breakup? Not breakup, but when things come to a head between them, the black moment, pacing that and making it hit and land right, was very difficult. Yeah.
I really liked, though, one thing that I love in a romance is when, you know, you still have that moment, because I know that a lot of the time it's really necessary for the growth of the characters, but you never lose the feeling of security and that they both care for each other and are putting that care first, you know, as opposed to it being like a really stressful moment, which I hate.
Yeah. And that was something that, again, John Jacobson, to give him his credit, or their credits, is that they really hit on with me, was like April was coming off as too afraid. And they were like, I don't think April would be afraid of Dennis. Like, and that has implications with Dennis as a black hero being afraid of him. Like, does April really think Dennis would ever hurt her? And it's like, no, she's terrified of losing what they have. She's not for a moment afraid of him. Like, the idea that Dennis would say something unkind or God forbid raise his hand is like it's not on the table. It's not even on the planet as far as they're concerned. So John was super helpful in making that that land right, and that was part of rewriting that scene.
Another question, a third question: what do you know now that you wish you knew at the beginning of your writing journey?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm not sure. You know, I wish, again, that I'd heard more of these discussions about race and identity in writing these stories. I wish. It's a really good question. I'm glad I didn't know how long it was going to take. I'll say that. Like, I mean, I knew how long it was going to take, but I didn't, you know, I don't know. It feels like it's been so long since I wrote this book. And I think if I'd known how long the delay gratification was going to be, I might not have bothered. Just because I'm an impatient person at heart. Yeah. I wish I had I wish in a bigger sense I'd understood the importance of the romance author community earlier and started making those connections even earlier than I did. I got in pretty soon in there, but you know, even earlier, even really just like sort of putting in my time and making those connections before I needed anything. You know, it's tough to go up to people for the first time and be like, hey, will you give me a blurb? You've never heard of me, but I promise I'm nice. You know, when you've sort of paid your dues and been around and people have seen you doing that, it does make life a little easier.
Pauline asks, could you name one thing you want readers to take away from your book?
Yeah, I think they're slightly different things, because the book is written for trans women at heart. Like, I wrote it for myself, and I'm a trans woman. And for that audience, I want them to take away that happy ending and be like, you know, we can be these heroines. We can have here's a story about someone who's like me, who has the anxieties and the fears that I have, and it all turns out. And I want them to take away that sort of warm bubble. For everybody else, what I want them to take away it is much the same thing. I want them to see a story. So we were talking about the cover at the beginning, and one of the things I love about my cover is that it fits the description I wanted for April, which is that she's very beautiful, but she does not pass. And that "but" there does a lot of work. And it's like, oh, are you saying that people who don't pass aren't? No, I'm not. That's the opposite. It's that there are many beautiful women, trans women, who don't pass, and they beat themselves up about it, but they're beautiful. And at some point, actually one of the things about joining this community and meeting so many trans women was that it really recalibrated my brain to be like, oh, she's gorgeous, without any like first filter. Like it didn't matter. Passing just didn't matter anymore because I've seen so many trans women. It was like, oh, she's gorgeous. And that was what I wanted for April, is that, she's a woman, and she's a woman, and she has the experiences of a woman and the story of a woman. And the type of woman that she is a trans woman, which means that her story is different in these ways, in the same way that if she was a Black woman, her story would be different in these ways. Or if she was a Southeast Asian woman, her story would be different in these ways. If she was Fatima or if she was Vanessa, her story would be different, but it would still be the story of a woman in love. And I want people to read this story and be like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, she's a woman in love, and I know that. And yet, okay, I see how, like, one of the things she worries about is like facial hair and she gets in the electrolysis that she gets, and like to understand like, oh, that's a different part of her experience that maybe a cis woman doesn't have, but it's still the same story. And to really like get that humanity and that insight into what it's like out there without it being like a third. So often trans people wind up as like a third sex, and it's like, she is a woman, but she's a trans woman, and this is her story, and hopefully reading it teaches you what that means, and how that's different and how it's the same, and that's what I hope that people who aren't trans take away from it.
That's lovely. And this last question is actually a really nice kind of epilogue question. So Laura asks, what are April and Dennis doing 10 years after the end of the book?
10 years after the book. I wonder if that's my wife. Her name is Laura. 10 years after the book. I thought a lot about this, and I wouldn't have been able to answer it when I wrote the epilogue. The epilogue only goes forward 1 year. I wouldn't have been able to answer this, but I think April and Dennis would have kids. I think they would adopt. April, because they do have that sort of mom and dad energy. I think April would love to have some kids. I think April would love to have kids. And I don't know where they would get them from, where they would adopt from. It's, it obviously 10 years is a long time. A lot of things could happen, but I'm not sure. But I think they would adopt some kids and be raising those kids together in Austin, for sure. I think April would probably still be at Frankie's, maybe less active as she's getting older, running some charity stuff with Dennis's money. That's some stuff that I've already figured out in like the near term. Is there's a scene where Jason sits April down and is like, so you're spending a lot of Dennis's money. And she's like, oh, great. This is a good conversation. He's like, no, look, I'm going to send you to my accountant, because if you're going to do it, there's a smart way to do it. And you need an LLC, you need a 501(c), and you need someone to run it. And she taps Alina to do that. So those are some things that happen in the first 2 or 3 years after the book. And so I think eventually that would take up more of her time, like a charity that benefits like trans youth, and eventually kids.
I love that. Now I'm envisioning her as like a charity lady with a big hat.
That's you hit the right age, and they send you the big hat now. So.
Okay, so we don't have a ton of time left, but there are like a couple of quick questions that I wanted to ask you, like lightning questions.
Yes.
So first of all, do you prefer to write during the day or at night?
I did most of my writing during the day. Yeah.
Same. Night writing just makes me tired. What is your favorite romance trope to read?
Fake romances are fun. Fake romance is a lot of fun. Only One Bed is cheap but very good fun.
Cheap but a crowd pleaser.
Yes.
Love Only One Bed. And what, if it's different, is your favorite romance trope to write?
I find tropes super hard to write. I'll cop out with that answer, because I worry way more about plausibility than I do when I'm a writer doing it. I'm trying to write a fake relationship romance right now with a couple of April's friends, and it's so hard to be like, just go for it. They just fucking lie and say that they're dating, and it's like, well, but like, what does their internal monologue look like when they're telling such a ridiculous lie? And it's like, just do it.
You really have to like start so many intensely tropey stories. You have to start like, it's a story and it's going to be fun and ridiculous. Go, go, go. And then just write the silliest thing you can think of. Do you prefer salty or sweet snacks when you're writing?
I like both, but I can eat more salty than sweet. I only have a limited amount of sweet that I can take at a time.
Oh, really? I'm the
Yeah.
opposite. I can take all the sweet. Too much sweet, arguably. Okay, last question. If you were a superhero, what would your superpower be?
Teleportation. It's always been
Ooh.
teleportation. Ideally, like Nightcrawler, hopefully without the blue fur.
Yeah.
But yeah, teleportation and sticking to things like Spider-Man.
That does seem very useful. So
Yeah.
you're very much a getting about kind of gal.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm walking places and I can see them, I literally imagine, what if I was Nightcrawler? I could just
Oh my
and
god.
like, yeah,
I have that same thing, but like with, what is it called when you bring objects to you?
telekinesis.
Yeah. I think when I was a kid, I watched Matilda and it was like, she's really smart, so she can do telekinesis. And I was like, so if I'm smart enough, I don't have to get up to fetch the remote. This is amazing. It's been my dream.
There have been time. This is the dark. I'll give the darker answer to that, which is there have been times when I've been stuck in a situation that I don't want to be in a line at an airport, and I just imagine my anger as like a corona around me, like just burning up everything. And I would imagine, I'm like, if I had this power, this entire city block would be vaporized right now. I have had that. It kind of goes to the telekinesis fantasy of just like in my mind, I'm imagining. And if
so
I had this power, this place would be a crater right now. You should all be glad I don't have superpower. But I don't have that one as much anymore because I don't go out in the world with Corona. But sometimes I think that way. Yeah.
You know what? Fair enough. I actually can't believe that this is our hour. Like, we've been here for an hour, but apparently, according to the clock, we have. So we do actually have to leave, even though I still have like 10,000 more questions. But I suppose I will just cope with that. I want to say thank you so much to everyone who's come to join us.
Absolutely.
And thank you most of all to you, Penny, for an amazing book, truly, and a wonderful conversation about said book.
Thank you for your time.
And I want to remind everyone as well that, once again, For the Love of April French is available for pre-order now, but it comes out this Tuesday, the 31st of August. So grab it if you need a great, cozy, kinky romance novel in your life. Everyone deserves a slice of April and Dennis. And with that,